If you have ever watched someone find amusement in another person's pain, especially the pain of someone who trusted them, hit that like button right now and subscribe to this channel. Because what Steve Harvey witnessed on his stage one afternoon in the fall of 2024 was not a misunderstanding, not a careless joke, not a moment that could be explained away. It was something colder than that. And Steve Harvey, who has seen a great deal in 30 years of standing in rooms with people, did not let it pass. There are many ways a person can be unkind to someone they love. Some are loud, some are obvious, some arrive in the form of a raised voice or a slammed door, things the room can hear and the people in it can name. But there is a specific category of cruelty that is harder to address precisely because it is quiet, because it wears the face of amusement, because it presents itself to the casual observer as lightheartedness and relies on the social awkwardness of the moment to ensure that no one with authority looks closely enough to see it for what it is. A smirk is not a small thing. A smirk directed at the tears of a person who trusts you is a declaration. It says, "Your pain is interesting to me." It says, "I am above it." It says, in the language of contempt that relationship researchers have identified as the single most reliable predictor of a marriage in serious trouble. I do not take you seriously enough to be moved by what moves you. Steve Harvey saw the smirk. And Steve Harvey, who had spent 3 decades reading faces with the precision of a man whose livelihood depends on understanding what people mean underneath what they perform, knew exactly what he was looking at. What he said in response did not make the audience uncomfortable. It made them erupt with the specific, full-chested sound of 500 people who had been waiting, without knowing they were waiting, for someone to name the thing they had all just seen. The Hollins family had come to Atlanta from Knoxville, Tennessee, 5 people who arrived at the studio on a Saturday morning in October in good weather and reasonable spirits. They had checked into a hotel the night before, eaten dinner together at a barbecue restaurant that Marcus Hollins had identified through what his daughter described as an unnecessarily thorough research process, and had gone over survey strategy until Vivienne Hollins had declared that she was going to sleep, and that anyone who wanted to keep talking about common survey answers was welcome to do so in the lobby. Vivienne Hollins was 52 years old. She had grown up in eastern Tennessee, the daughter of a Methodist minister and a piano teacher, in a household that ran on the dual disciplines of faith and music, and had produced in Vivienne a specific combination of emotional depth and structural precision that her friends described as simultaneously the most and least surprising thing about her. She felt things profoundly. She also organized her linen closet by thread count. She had spent 20 years as a grief counselor, working primarily with bereaved families, with people navigating the specific and poorly understood territory that follows significant loss. She had sat with hundreds of people in their worst hours and had brought to each of those hours the same quality: the ability to be fully present in someone else's pain without either minimizing it or being submerged by it. Her supervisor at the counseling center, where she had worked for 11 of those 20 years, had described her, in a performance review that Vivienne had kept because it said something she wanted to remember, as the most genuinely compassionate clinician she had supervised in 30 years of practice. She was also, by the accounts of people who knew her well, extremely funny. Her humor was dry and precise and arrived unexpectedly, the way the humor of people who spend most of their professional lives in serious registers sometimes does, as a form of relief rather than performance. Her children had inherited it in varying degrees. Her husband had not. Marcus Hollins was 56. He was a senior partner at a mid-sized accounting firm in Knoxville, a man who had spent his professional life in a world that rewarded precision, detachment, and the subordination of feeling to fact. He was not an unkind man by anyone's external measure. He was present, reliable, competent, and largely undemonstrative in a way that his family had learned to read as care rather than indifference, because the alternative reading was harder to sustain over the long term and produced no practical benefit. What Marcus Hollins had, and had always had, was a difficulty with other people's emotions that went beyond the ordinary male conditioning around feeling. It was more specific than that. He was uncomfortable with displays of vulnerability in the way that people are uncomfortable with things they cannot fix or categorize, not hostile to them, but unable to meet them with the presence they required. Over 26 years of marriage to a grief counselor, this had produced a dynamic that their couple's therapist, they had seen twice, both times at Vivienne's initiation, had described as an empathy gap, not the absence of care, but the absence of the ability to express care in the register that the other person needed it expressed. Vivienne had made her peace with this, in the gradual, realistic way that people make peace with the limitations of long marriages. She loved Marcus. She knew he loved her. She had simply learned not to expect from him what he had demonstrated across 26 years, that he was not equipped to provide. Their daughter Kayla, 28, was the family member who had submitted the Family Feud application. She worked in marketing, was competitive by nature and by training, and had assembled the team with the specific intentionality of a person who wanted to win and had thought carefully about the composition most likely to produce that outcome. She had chosen her parents, her brother Derek, 25, and her mother's sister Anita, 49, as the fifth member. She had not, in the course of this planning, considered the possibility that the afternoon would produce anything other than a game. The Hollins family was matched against the Acaffer family from Nashville, 5 people with excellent chemistry, strong survey instincts, and a collective ease that had the audience invested early. The game was competitive from the first buzzer, and both families played with genuine skill through the opening rounds. Steve Harvey had worked the introductions with his customary attention, reading each family member in turn. He had spent a moment with Vivienne and had noticed immediately what he often notices about people who work in the caring professions, the specific quality of attentiveness they bring to a room, the way they seem to register more of what is happening around them than most people do. He had asked her what she did. Grief counselor, she said. He had paused, as people always paused at that, and had asked whether the work was heavy. She had said, sometimes. And then she had said, with the dry precision that her children had described, that the rest of the time it was a reminder that most of what people argued about in ordinary life was genuinely trivial, which she found, depending on the day, either comforting or maddening. The audience had laughed. Steve had laughed. Marcus, 2 people to her left, had smiled, the brief, acknowledging smile of a man who had heard his wife be funny before and did not feel required to participate in the response. Steve had noted the quality of that smile and filed it alongside the other things he was noting and filing. The game moved through its first 2 rounds with the energy of a well-matched contest. In the second round, a question was asked, a standard Family Feud question about things people say when they are trying to comfort someone who is upset, and Vivienne answered it with the top-ranked response without apparent effort, which was not surprising given her professional context. The audience applauded. Kayla turned to her mother with the bright, proud energy of a daughter watching her parent perform well. And then Steve Harvey, following the natural momentum of the moment, turned to Vivienne and asked the question that opened the rest of the afternoon. Now, as a grief counselor, you must have seen a lot of families go through some incredibly hard things. What is the one thing that you have seen help people the most in those moments? It was a good question, genuine, specific, the kind that invites a real answer rather than a performed one. Vivienne took a breath and began to speak. She spoke about the presence of another person, about the specific healing power of being in a room with someone who is not trying to fix you or move you through your grief on a schedule that suits them, but is simply willing to remain with you in it. She spoke about what she had learned over 20 years about what people in grief actually needed, which was almost never what the people around them thought they needed, and almost always some version of the same simple thing, to not be alone in it. To be witnessed, she had been speaking for perhaps 45 seconds when her voice caught. Not dramatically, a brief, almost imperceptible catch, the kind that happens when a person is speaking from genuine experience about something that has moved them many times and moves them again in the speaking of it. She paused for a moment, composed herself, and continued. The audience received the catch with the soft, respectful silence that genuine emotion in an unguarded moment produces. Several people in the front rows visibly responded. A hand moved to a face. A person leaned slightly toward their neighbor. Steve Harvey looked at Vivienne with the full, steady attention he gives to moments that matter. And then, from 2 people to her left, in the peripheral vision of everyone on the left side of the studio, Marcus Hollins smiled. Not the warm, responsive smile of a husband watching his wife be moved. The smile that appeared on Marcus Hollins's face in that moment was a different thing entirely. It was small, and it was quick, and it was directed not at Vivienne but at some private, interior register that the smile was the surface expression of. It was the smile of a man who found something mildly amusing about what was happening next to him. It was a smirk. There is no more precise word for it, and no less precise word adequately describes what it communicated. Kayla saw it. Derek saw it. Anita, standing at the end of the line, saw it and looked at the floor. Steve Harvey, who was facing the family directly, saw it with complete clarity. Steve did not react immediately. He allowed Vivienne to finish her answer, which she did composedly, completely, in the measured way of a professional who has learned to continue speaking in difficult rooms. He thanked her. He acknowledged what she had said with the sincerity it deserved. The audience responded. Then he turned to Marcus, not with anger, not with performance, with the specific contained quality of attention that, on Steve Harvey's stage, indicates that something is about to be said that required preparation and will not be retracted. "Marcus," he said, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer me honestly." Marcus looked at him with the composed, slightly wary expression of an accountant who has been told there is a discrepancy and is waiting to hear where. "When your wife was speaking just now," Steve said, "and her voice caught, I saw something on your face, and I want to give you the opportunity to tell me what it meant, because I want to believe I misread it." The studio was completely still. Not a single person in 500 was making a sound. Marcus said that he had not been aware of his expression. He said that he sometimes processed things differently than other people, that he and Vivienne had different styles. He used the word styles twice. He spoke in the careful, qualifying register of a man who has spent his career in a profession where precision of language is protective. Steve listened to all of it. When Marcus finished, Steve nodded once. "I hear you," he said, "and I want to respond to something specific that you said because I think it matters. You said you and Vivienne have different styles. I understand that. People do have different styles, but I want to be very precise about something." He paused. "What I saw on your face was not a different style. A different style is being quieter than your partner. A different style is expressing care in a different way, through action rather than words, through practicality rather than emotion. Those are styles. What I saw on your face was amusement, while your wife's voice broke. While she was speaking from 20 years of sitting with people in their grief about the one thing that helps human beings survive loss, and the thing on your face was amusement." Marcus started to respond. Steve raised one hand, the same quiet, final gesture he had used with Travis Delacroix, with Brent Whitfield, with the other men on this stage who had needed to be stopped rather than redirected. "I am not done," Steve said. "I want to tell you something. Your wife has spent 20 years helping people survive the worst thing that happens to human beings. She walks into rooms where people are broken, and she stays in those rooms until the people in them feel less alone. She does that every day. And she came home from those rooms to your house, to your dinner table, to your life. And she was just standing on this stage in front of all these people, being exactly who she is, being moved by the work she has given her life to. And the thing on your face told her that who she is strikes you as something to smirk at." The audience had not erupted yet. It was holding the specific, pressurized holding of a crowd that has reached the limit of its contained response and is waiting for the release. Steve turned away from Marcus. He turned to Vivienne. "I want to say something to you," he said, "and I want every person in this room to hear it because I think it needs to be said in a room this size and it needs to be said loudly." He looked at her steadily. "You are describing the most important thing, the most important human thing. The thing that makes the difference in the worst moments of a person's life between surviving and not surviving, being witnessed, being present, being stayed with. You know what that is because you have given it to hundreds of people who needed it, and you deserve it back, not from strangers, not from a studio audience, from the person standing next to you, from the person who has had the extraordinary privilege of being your partner for 26 years. You deserve to have your tears met with presence, not with amusement. You deserve that, full stop, no asterisks." The crowd erupted. It was not the contained, respectful applause of a room witnessing something tender. It was the full, percussive, on-their-feet response of 500 people who had been holding the weight of what they had watched for the past several minutes and had been given, finally, the signal to release it. The floor manager later described it as the loudest sustained response she had recorded in 4 years of working that studio. It ran for 41 seconds before Steve raised his hand, not to quiet it but to join it, clapping slowly and deliberately while he looked at Vivienne, who was standing in the center of it with tears on her face and her hands pressed together in front of her mouth, and an expression that was not embarrassment and not grief, but something that the people who have read this script will recognize as the specific expression of a person receiving something they needed and had not known how badly they needed until it arrived. Marcus Hollins was not smirking. He was looking at his wife with an expression that had, in the span of the previous 4 minutes, traveled a considerable distance from where it had started. The game resumed after the ovation settled. The Hollins family did not win. They lost the fast money round by 8 points to the Acaffer family, who played a near-perfect final segment. The score, as it had been in several of these afternoons on this stage, felt entirely beside the point. Backstage after taping, a production assistant observed that Marcus Hollins stayed close to his wife in a way that had a different quality than his proximity had carried during the game. Not the proximity of a man managing his position in a room, but the proximity of a man who was uncertain of something and was staying close because closeness was the only response available to him. The episode aired 8 weeks later. The clip of Steve's exchange with Marcus, beginning with the question about Marcus's expression and ending with the 41-second ovation, was viewed 31 million times within the first 72 hours of its release. It became, by multiple measures, the most widely shared clip the show had produced in its recent history, and it spread into communities and demographics that Family Feud content almost never reached. Relationship therapy communities, clinical psychology networks, domestic counseling organizations, and the substantial online community organized around the specific subject of emotional neglect in long-term marriages. The phrase Steve had used, being witnessed, traveled independently of the clip, circulating in relationship advice spaces and therapy practice social media accounts as both a concept and a practice recommendation. Several therapists noted publicly that the phrase, in Steve Harvey's usage of it, captured in 2 words something they had been trying to communicate to clients for years: that the primary need in grief, and in vulnerability more broadly, was not to be fixed, not to be advised, not to be moved along, but to be seen by someone who had chosen to stay. The response from women in the 45 to 65 demographic was, as it had been for several of the preceding stories in this series, characterized by specificity rather than generality. They did not write about the clip in the abstract. They wrote about Marcus. They wrote about the specific quality of amusement on his face, the smirk, and about their recognition of it. They wrote about the years of bringing their grief or their difficulty or their genuine emotion to a partner who had responded not with cruelty, but with something they had often found harder to address than cruelty: indifference dressed as amusement, the mild smile, the slightly raised eyebrow, the expression that said, "This is more than I'm going to engage with, and I am going to signal that without making a scene about it." They wrote about how long it had taken them to understand that this pattern had a name. Several of them cited the word contempt and the research that linked it to relationship outcomes. Several of them said they had forwarded the clip to a therapist. The response from relationship therapists and counselors was perhaps the most significant indicator of the clip's specific usefulness. Several licensed clinicians shared it with commentary noting that it functioned as one of the clearest public illustrations they had encountered of the difference between emotional unavailability, which is often characterized as a style difference, as Marcus had characterized it, and contempt, which is categorically different and carries categorically different implications. The distinction Steve Harvey had drawn, without using clinical language, between a different style and amusement while your partner's voice breaks, was described by several practitioners as the most accessible version of a distinction they taught in clinical training that they had ever seen delivered to a general audience. Steve Harvey addressed the moment in a long-form interview recorded 6 weeks after the episode. He was, as he had been in previous accounts of similar moments, direct about his motivation. "When I saw that expression on Marcus's face," he said, "I knew exactly what I was looking at, not because I am a therapist or a researcher, because I have been in a room where I was the person whose pain was not taken seriously by the person whose opinion mattered most to me, and I know what that costs. I know the specific accumulated cost of being in a long relationship with someone who finds your genuine emotion slightly inconvenient, slightly excessive, slightly dramatic, slightly beneath engagement. That cost does not arrive all at once. It arrives in increments over years, and the person bearing it often does not have the language to describe what is being taken from them, because the taking is so gradual and so undramatic that it does not announce itself." He paused before continuing. "Vivienne is a grief counselor. She has spent 20 years being the presence for other people that her own partner was not providing for her. That is not uncommon. People often go into the caring professions partly because they have an intimate understanding of what it means to need care and not receive it. I do not know that is true of Vivienne specifically, but I know what I saw on Marcus's face, and I know what it meant about the dynamic they were standing inside. And I was not prepared to let it sit unchallenged in that room." He was asked whether he believed Marcus was a bad man. "No," he said without hesitation. "Marcus Hollins is not a bad man. He is a man who has spent his life being very good at not feeling things in public, and who has extended that skill into his marriage without understanding the damage that extension causes over time. That is a correctable thing. It is not correctable on a game show stage in a single afternoon. But it can begin there. It can begin with someone being willing to name it clearly, without cruelty, in a room where the person who has been living inside it finally hears it named. That is what I tried to do. Vivienne Hollins gave a written statement released through the production team 4 weeks after the episode aired. It was the statement of a grief counselor, precise, compassionate, and entirely free of self-pity. She said that she was well and that the response from the public had moved her in ways she was still processing. She said that she was a grief counselor, and therefore she understood, better than most, the specific experience of being seen clearly by someone in an unexpected context. She said that what Steve Harvey had done on that stage was something her profession called witnessing, the act of being fully present with another person's experience without attempting to manage it, minimize it, or redirect it. She said that she had spent 20 years offering that to other people and that receiving it, unexpectedly, from a man she had never met in a room full of strangers, had reminded her of something she had known professionally for a long time and had perhaps recently allowed herself to forget, that she deserved it too. She did not address Marcus in the statement. She did not address the state of their marriage. She said that some things were private and would remain so, and that she was grateful the public had respected that boundary in the days since the clip had circulated. The statement closed with a single line. What I will carry from that afternoon is not what happened on the stage. It is the 41 seconds afterward. 500 people on their feet saying without words, "We see you." That is the whole of what any person needs. I know this professionally. Now I know it personally too. Marcus Hollins did not make a public statement. He did not seek media attention. Several people who knew the family said, without providing specifics, that the weeks following the episode had involved significant private conversation and that Marcus had engaged with a counselor, not the couple's therapist they had seen previously, but someone new, someone he had sought out independently, for the first time in his life without being asked. Kayla Hollins, whose application had produced the afternoon, posted a brief item on the day the episode aired that was characteristic in its compression and its precision. She wrote, "My mother has spent 20 years helping strangers survive their worst days. Today, 500 strangers helped her. That's the whole thing. That's all I have." It was shared 280,000 times. Vivienne's colleague at the counseling center, the supervisor who had written the performance review that Vivienne had kept, watched the clip on the evening it was posted and called Vivienne the following morning. By Vivienne's later account, it was a short call. Her supervisor had said 3 things: that she was glad that it was overdue, and that if Steve Harvey ever wanted a job in grief counseling, he had the instincts for it. Vivienne had laughed, the dry, precise laugh that arrived without warning. The one her husband had not for 26 years understood the full value of. If this story reached you, if it named something you have lived inside or watched someone you love live inside, hit that like button right now. And if you believe that the most important thing one person can offer another is simply to be present, to witness, to stay, subscribe to this channel. We bring you stories like this one every single week. Stories about real people, real marriages, and the moments when someone finally says the thing that the room has needed to hear. We will see you in the next one.